Welcome to the Evergreen RX, your prescription for living well. Here, we're all about self-exploration, intentionality, and working with our mind, body, and soul for healing and growth. I'm your host, Hayden. I'm in my 20s and in search of connection, fulfillment, and ways to make sense of the world. If you're down, join me as I explore tools to bridge the gap between external reality and our deep inner worlds, discovering our own prescriptions for health, wholeness, and expansion. Hello, and welcome back to the Evergreen RX. Today, we are going to be talking about starting therapy. This is a topic that I decided on because, I am a therapist myself. I'm really steeped in the mental health world, and I've heard from a lot of people the struggle of trying to find a therapist, trying to find the right fit, what to even look for, and have had friends ask me questions and look for guidance on choosing a therapist. And so I thought might as well try to culminate what I know and what I can share into an episode for all of y'all. So if you're looking for a therapist, or even if you have one, I think there's some helpful tips on just being a part of this process and being on the healing or mental health journey. I think therapy is a large part of it, or can be. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good things to share about there. So obviously, I am definitely going to get into some of the how, like where to look and what to look for and cost, insurance, like questions like that we'll definitely get into. But I really kind of want to start off with the why, I guess, the motivating factor behind finding therapy, or finding a therapist. If you've listened to the other episodes or kind of have a feel so far of what the Evergreen RX is all about, intentionality is a huge core pillar of that. So I think it goes the same when looking for a therapist, knowing your intention and your desires behind pursuing that method of healing or self-exploration. It can help empower you to make more informed decisions, but also just to feel a sense of intrinsic motivation when you're going through this process that sometimes can take a little bit, or is just, it's an investment of time to try to find a therapist. So when you first start thinking about therapy, usually, from my experience, people are spurred on by some kind of presenting problems. That can be like symptoms, maybe symptoms of depression, or you're struggling with anxiety. Maybe you have a career change or a move that's thrown you off kilter, or starting a family. There can be a lot of reasons. Maybe you want to stop a certain habit, or you have started to understand the impacts of your childhood, or maybe how your parents treated you growing up, and you want someone to help unpack all of that with. So most of the time, we identify a problem that we want solved, and that is the spur or the initial spark to seek out therapy, which is great, because I think a big way that we learn what we want is by figuring out what we don't want. It's a huge resource of information gathering for us, and so it makes sense that problems are what spur seeking therapy. With that said, though, there is a lot of value, I think, in also looking at the other side of the coin. So maybe you know all the things that you want to change or fix about yourself or work on, but looking at what it is that you ultimately want your life to look like. So there's this question, I think it's called the $1 million question, and it's, if you go to therapy and we did work together and you get to a point where you feel that you're ready to, be done with therapy, even if that's just temporarily, because I don't think you ever have to be done necessarily, but if you get to a point where you're feeling really good, how would you know? What would your life look like? And that really gets our brains into, instead of just looking at the problem, it's kind of getting more into like the positive side of things. We really, as humans, have a negative bias a lot of times in seeing what doesn't work, but that question kind of helps switch into that positivity of, what could my life look like? How would I know that I was feeling better, at least behaviorally? What would be observable that signified to me that I was in a different place and I had made improvements? And I think that's just a helpful tool in figuring out some goals and desires when you embark on this process. And it might kind of seem like early on to be, before you've even like gone on Psychology Today or look for a therapist, to be thinking, what do I want it to look like when I'm out of therapy? But really, when you have that anchor, I think it can help narrow down the search a little bit, because reading people's bios, reading the values that they list, I'm all about helping my clients find their identity, or I want to help clients cultivate peace. I want to, those kind of things are some of the types of phrases you'll read in a therapist bio. And if you have an idea of kind of what your end goal is, some might resonate more than others. If you really were wanting to explore your sexuality and you're in your early 20s, you're doing a lot of identity formation, maybe that therapist that says that they love to help their clients understand themselves, their worlds, their personalities better is a way better fit than the one saying, I'm all about creating peace and contentment. Not that either person could be wrong or would necessarily be a bad fit, but it can just help take all of the information down into a more digestible chunk, and you can really kind of just do a scan and not have to take everything in all at once, but really have your eye out for certain criteria or specialties. So I think another thing to consider is what to expect. Maybe this is your first time going to therapy, or you're picking it back up after a while, and just kind of knowing what that process could look like. If I could boil it all down into one piece of maybe like advice, or I don't know, just like discussion point, is to expect to sit in the unknown. I think, I couldn't possibly describe what a first session with a therapist could be like, because there's so many factors that go into that interaction. So really, I think it is just, when you're starting off therapy, there is so much unknown, and that can be really intimidating or scary or overwhelming. So just kind of giving yourself some space and understanding that it is an unknown process. There are a lot of factors at play, and so you won't know everything to expect before it happens. But, exploring what it feels like to be a little bit uncomfortable or out of your comfort zone or zone of control. I think a lot of people go into therapy and are nervous because, as the client, you're probably going to be asked like a good amount of questions, or more of the attention will be on you, and that feels sometimes like, oh God, like you don't have as much control over that dynamic as maybe in just a normal everyday conversation. But embracing that as a part of the process sometimes can take a little bit of the pressure off to have it all figured out, or to get it all right, or pick the exact fit from the beginning. I had a therapist that I work with tell me when I was getting adjusted and acquainted with doing intake sessions, which is what the first session is called, she was like, intake sessions are awkward. Like, it's going to be awkward, and that's okay. And it totally was like a paradigm shift for me. And weirdly enough, I feel like I've experienced less awkwardness since then, because I was just like, oh yeah, like it is two people meeting and getting to know each other, feeling out the vibe. And so that might be awkward, and that's okay. And I can kind of embrace that, or at least, surrender to it being a part of the process, being a part of the reality that is starting therapy. And that's on the client end and on the therapist end. There can be nerves and anxiety from a therapist as well. We're meeting you for the first time too, so I think it's helpful to keep in mind. So now I want to dive into a little bit of, maybe the biases or limiting beliefs that can impact embarking on this process. So, a really good thing to keep in mind when you start looking for a therapist is past history. Maybe your own past history, or maybe experiences that you've heard from friends or family members about their experience in therapy. Now, this can be really good, glowing reviews. Maybe you have friends that just are the biggest therapy advocate because they have a wonderful relationship with their therapist, or it can be the opposite and somebody's had horrible experiences. It's like any other job. There's people that are good at their job and bad at their job. And so people will have a whole range of experiences, and that can impact, it can create certain feelings around starting this journey. Maybe there's some enthusiasm and excitement there. Maybe there's some trepidation and fear. And I think the biggest thing to remember here is that you are not locked into any situation that you go to. 1 session, 5 sessions, you're not locked in. You might have a great first impression and it doesn't last, or the connection doesn't seem as strong, or it can be the opposite. And so just, going in with an open mind that, like anything, like if you're finding a hairdresser, there is a chance you might get a bad haircut along the way, but the journey is worth it. You're not going to just give up altogether going and getting your hair cut just because of one bad haircut. Obviously, my intention, my desire for all of you is that you never have a, bad haircut equivalent experience in therapy. But knowing that, it can happen, and you don't just throw in the towel all the way because of that experience. Something else that I think can have influence over this process, or kind of how we go about it, is maybe some fears. So there can be some fears over starting and thinking, what could be lurking? Like, is there something I'm not aware of that's impacting my behavior, something deep in my psyche or my unconscious? Thank you to Freud for really planting that fear in everyone, because if you even have, sideways experience with pop psychology, you probably have heard about the shadow side, or animalistic drives and instincts, and, the Oedipus complex or whatever. And all of those things are not actually as scary as they sound, but also those fears are super valid. And I think it's something you can share with, a therapist if it feels like something you want to, like, hey, I'm feeling very nervous about what could come up, or if I'm not aware of something, if I don't, if I'm going to just have something happen that's going to totally alter how I view myself. And I think that's really good material to process, because it's really understandable. I think it's superhuman to feel that way. And all I can tell you is that, at least from my orientation and what I believe, is that, your psyche is not some big, bad, terrible place to just dive headfirst into, and your, whole conception of yourself or your life or your childhood or something is shattered. I think that would be way too overwhelming to just dive into. And also, that's not how I see the process working. So if that's peace of mind, that's my opinion. Now, here's where I think it gets really juicy around some limiting beliefs. I think when we get that itch to start therapy or go back to therapy, it is so well intended. That is a part of us that's saying, it's time to look at this. You can grow, you can change. Let's do it. Let's get the help you need. Let's invest in ourselves. Like, that is such a beautiful part of us that really drives that process. And there can be other parts of us, or other beliefs that have been instilled in us, that have a different agenda. And we don't want to villainize. There's no problem with that. We want to really actually listen to what those parts are trying to say about, fears or concerns or resistances to, embarking on this journey. Because all I can say is it can be hard enough to find a therapist that's a good fit, that maybe it takes your insurance, is the right location, yada, yada, has openings, all of that. That can be enough work. Much less adding on top some parts of yourself that are maybe working against the process a little bit, maybe are a little okay with the fact that it's hard to find a therapist, because then that gives a good reason why maybe they don't actually have to start therapy, or, oh, it's just too hard, let's just give it all up. So maybe you grew up with the belief that, you help yourself. You pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't rely on other people. You don't ask for help. You don't talk about your feelings. You don't talk about what's going on. You just do what needs to be done and you manage. That's a big one to unpack, and getting a therapist kind of feels like it's in opposition to that. Reaching out for help, that can be a really big mental shift for a lot of people. Also the struggling artist or creative mentality. You can only be creative, or you can only be funny, or you can only access your art if you're struggling or if you're sad. That art flows out of those pained places. And so if you heal, if you're happy, if you're better, you won't be able to make art. Maybe you're afraid about a certain identity or role and having to give that up. We have roles within our families or within our social structures, or even identities like people pleasing. We might not like them, we might not feel like they're serving us, but they do at some point feel like they're a part of us, of who we are. And it can be scary or unknown to give that up, to think of who you would be or what you would do if you didn't carry that role anymore. This can also go with grief or trauma, that somehow healing is equal to moving on or forgetting. If you've lost a loved one, that if you process that grief, then, you're doing a disservice, or you're betraying the person that you lost or their memory. Oh, that one, it's so understandable and it's so heavy, because I think it really gets a lot of people stuck in carrying their grief or their trauma all on their own, in an effort to not do a disservice to that person, or to not invalidate the experience. With trauma, that if you heal from it, if you reclaim those parts of yourself, that, that fear that it might invalidate the experience as being really, really important or really informative in your life. And, I know from a therapist perspective, and if you have a good therapist, that's not what happens. We can hold space for the grief, for the trauma, and also hold space for your own joy and for your own life, and process of moving forward. But it can be scary. Another common thing is the fear of changing and maybe losing people. At the place that I work, in the informed consent, there's even a small section on risks of therapy. And really, a main risk would be that you can lose people. If you do change, if you morph and it no longer fits in your life, those relationships, aren't able to grow with you. That is a legitimate thing that can happen. And again, it's not like trying to be scary with that, but that is a commitment or an understanding that we have to know when we start this process. So maybe you saw yourself in one of those beliefs, or resonate or identify with something maybe I didn't even list. And I think really why I bring this up is just have an awareness around it. A therapist can actually help process or heal some of these beliefs, which, could be a really interesting starting place if you feel like they have a really strong operation on your ability or commitment to kind of dive into the healing process. But just in general, having an awareness of that might be a part of your experience when you go through this process of finding someone and being okay with it. Maybe that artist inside of you that's afraid that healing means that you'll no longer be creative, maybe you just have to to tend to that a little and take the process slow. You search a couple of therapists at a time, and you understand that there can be some resistance that exists while you also are moving forward with action. Okay, so why does it matter? It's kind of like last episode on mindfulness. Therapy is such a hot button topic right now, which is amazing, but also it can kind of get oversaturated. Like, okay, everybody's talking about this. Everybody's talking about their inner child work and their reparenting and all this shit. Like, why should I care? So I think the biggest benefit is literally just having someone that's an outside, unbiased processor. Like, just to bounce things off of, honestly. Like, even if you're doing a lot of this work internally and you do your journaling and you really have a lot of practices around growing and healing, it can just sometimes be really helpful to talk it out with someone else. I still go to therapy, and I feel like it is so beneficial for me to have someone hold the mirror up to me. Even though that's something I do for other people, I can't do it for myself. So another belief of mine specifically is that we repeat patterns until they're healed. So again, with that concept of a mirror, it's sometimes really helpful to have someone that's kind of gently pointing out to you how, the same behavior is getting the same results. And okay, you want something different, so let's talk about what would need to change, or maybe the roots that are driving that behavior. And it really just, at the end of the day, it helps you get going where you want to go faster, I think, because it's like two minds working on it instead of one. And one of those minds isn't just trying to like self-observe the whole time. I also think that therapy has a really beautiful ability to help people clarify their values, their purpose, and to really kind of like to get in the driver's seat in life and really enjoy the ride. There is a quality of life that can be accessed through having support and a trained professional to help. The last two little motivators I will throw out there for you if you are considering therapy is that there's something really beautiful about the safe space that can be created in the therapy room. Room it can be virtual too. It's just more of a mental concept than an actual room. But that safe space that can be created, that safe relationship with another person, can go so far in healing attachments. Creating a really secure bond with someone else in a very boundaried relationship is something a lot of us have not experienced before. Having a consistent, reliable, trustworthy, vulnerable relationship with another person, even though I do understand that the vulnerability to a degree is pretty one-sided, but still, having that consistency with professional boundaries, with ethical boundaries, really a good therapist holding that safe space can have so many healing properties just in and of itself, just existing in that space with another person, especially if that's something we've never experienced before. And I think in connection with that is just that we are social creatures and we live for connections and to be seen and to be witnessed. And therapy is a really beautiful place for that to happen. And the gift of, for me as a therapist, the gift of getting to be that witnesser for another person is something that I never take for granted. I'm extremely grateful to get to hold that space for someone else and to see people in such a pure light. I think it's really a beautiful privilege. All right. Now that we have the evergreen kind of hippy-dippy, let's dive into limiting beliefs and intentions and all that. Now that we've talked about that and I've gotten to say my piece, we'll get into how. I love a little bit of practicality too. I am all about mystical fun out there, and then I'm really a big practical girl as well. So I'm going to I'm going to lay out some how-tos and some hopefully helpful tips for embarking on this journey, so that maybe once this podcast is over, you feel a spark to get started, or have some new information that you're armed with to be a more informed consumer. So I think everybody's first question is where to look. The classic, the go-to is Psychology Today. I think almost every therapist out there has a Psychology Today profile. It's a very standardized website. You can search based on location. I think you can search specialty and maybe a few like demographic filters, and you just see people's photos and like a short part of their bio. You can click on their page for more things like specialties and location. Maybe they link out to a website. You can email them through Psychology Today. So that's a really good database. Like I really actually do believe that I understand the amount of results can be overwhelming, but there's also a lot of options out there. So I think that can be a good place to start. But two of my other favorite methods is just, one is word of mouth. So if you do have that friend that just like loves their therapist, maybe seeing if that therapist works at a practice and there's other people that you can look at, or maybe they have availability, maybe they know someone. Kind of keeping your ears open for people in your life that are in therapy and the places or the people that they've had good experiences with. I think word of mouth is really huge. And it just helps with that sense of trust a little bit. If you trust someone and they've had a good experience, then that might feel a little more welcoming. My other tip is maybe like a little bit more insider. I don't know. I think it's a great idea if there's somebody that you're super interested in. Like say you saw my profile online and thought, oh my gosh, this is so many things I'm looking for. This seems like a great fit. You reach out. I'm full, not taking clients, asking for referrals from me. Maybe I have friends or colleagues that I know do similar things or work with similar populations. I think that is a super helpful way. Therapists, we're always building our network and having a whole arsenal of referrals ready for people. So you can always try reaching out to someone, even if you know that they're full, and just saying, hey, like, this is what stood out. This is what resonated. Do you know anybody? Do you have any referrals for me on someone that works in your style? So how about the factors when it comes with picking the right fit? So there's two components to this. There's personality and like approach, and then logistics. So logistics is, do they have a scheduled time when you want, in person or virtual, depending on what you want? Do they take your insurance, or is, the cost of session a good fit for you? So obviously I can't really give like specific advice on what exactly you're looking for, but I think kind of laying out the terrain for all of the check boxes to kind of check out with a therapist, so that you can hopefully minimize the amount of time that you have to spend going through people that you found but aren't the right fit in some pretty like glaring ways. So I think some keys there are, one, if you're looking for someone in your insurance network, sometimes you can go on your insurance website and they'll have like a provider directory. So you can look that way to figure out, if you have Blue Cross Blue Shield, who accepts that, because not all therapists accept insurance, or if they do, they don't accept all insurances. And that, like, the whole process around that is very confusing and complicated. So sometimes reaching out specifically through your insurance can be a helpful way to find those resources. Also, just knowing ahead of time, if you really just want to do in person, or you have super limited availabilities, like just only on weekends or only at night, it might be good to include all of that in your email you reach out to the therapist with. You can say, I'm so-and-so, I'm looking to work on this, da-da-da-da. I would love in-person sessions, and my availability is Saturdays or weekdays after 6 p.m. You can kind of throw all of that out there, hopefully to save you time, because if the therapist doesn't match that, then you don't have to get on a consult and spend a lot of time talking, and then to realize, some of those logistical things are not a good match. So with the other piece of kind of just personality and approach, I think the things to look out for and to kind of have an understanding of what you want are, demographics. If you want to see a woman or maybe a certain aged therapist, you can kind of narrow down your Psychology Today search by some of that. Also, if there's an identity that's really important to you, there's no problem with seeking out a therapist that has an identity similar or the same as yours. If you're the LGBTQ plus community, there is a section on Psychology Today where people can put whether they're allied with that community, but you can also seek someone that is identified with that community. A lot of times people will have a section in their bio where they list some of those identities, racial or ethnic groups, neurodivergence. There is a lot of different identity groups that it's totally understandable from a cultural perspective, and knowing how important multicultural counseling is, to seek out someone that is either a part of that group or is, supportive and allied with that group. Obviously, every therapist, ideally, should be open and accepting to any cultural identity, but I know that having that be, a more prominent part of the match between you and a therapist is really important sometimes. So knowing that going in and using that as a search criteria can be helpful. So the last component of, picking the one, getting the right fit, is just their personality and approach to therapy. So if you're more of an informed, therapy goer, or you're into psychology and you're more familiar with some of the modalities or interventions or, whatever that people use, then that's great. If you know that internal family systems is something you're interested in, or somatic therapy or CBT, those terms, go with it. That's awesome. That can help narrow your search even more. If you don't understand those terms and you don't have a particular preference, that's also fine. I think sometimes it's overwhelming. You go to a therapist page and they're like, oh, I do Gestalt therapy and I'm certified in EMDR, and they throw out all these terms and acronyms because, my God, psychologists and counselors love acronyms. It can be really overwhelming, and I honestly think if you're not familiar with it, just glaze over it, skip over it. Don't worry about it. If you're really interested, you can ask when you meet with them to explain that. Hopefully they will explain their approach in terms that are understandable. And the part of the bio that you can pay attention to is maybe the part where they say a little bit about themselves and you really want to get a sense for their personality, or maybe they talk about their values for counseling, and you see something that really resonates for you. So really just take what's helpful out of the profiles and leave the rest, and don't get too bogged down in it. Maybe make your goals and your little bullet point list on what's the most important to you before you start your search, so that you can just kind of screen out all the rest. So most therapists will offer a free consultation call that can be a short, anywhere from 10 to 30 minute call, just to kind of do a vibe check. So this is as much a vibe check for them as it is for you, because obviously it's a two-way street and you want it to be a good match. And by, on the therapist perspective, a good match really means that whatever you're wanting to work on is within their scope, within their education and understanding, and the work that they feel that they're able to really bring a lot of benefit to. So yeah, usually you have this consult call. If it goes well, you can schedule, and then you have that intake session, the first session, which is really getting to know you and lay the foundation for the rest of the work together. And after that, pretty much it's session, weekly, bi-weekly sessions, whatever you've agreed on, and you keep going and you start working towards your goals and working towards healing. And so I think at every point of that journey, but especially, with the consult call, really checking in with your intuition. If you want to know more about intuition, you can definitely go back and listen to episode 2. But I think that's such a helpful tool in this process, because maybe you get on the phone call with someone that checked all your boxes and they look pretty cute in their profile photo and you're thinking, oh, this looks like a person I could work with. And then you get on the call and it's like just not there. It's not there. Totally fine. So I kind of want to close and round everything out with just a general statement. This process, 1, choosing to prioritize yourself, your mental health, your well-being, your growth, is such an amazing choice and takes a lot of courage and sometimes a lot of effort to find that right fit. So really just giving yourself kindness and love that you are doing a really beautiful thing for yourself, and knowing that there is nothing that you are really responsible for besides showing up and being open. A good therapist should, quote unquote, take care of you. I like to say that because I think that as a therapist, my responsibility is to create the safe space, create the holding environment, be the empathic witness, bring my education, my tools, my expertise, listen to you, help collaborate on your goals, hold that mirror up so that you can heal, be curious and non-judgmental and loving. That is my responsibility. As long as you're open and you're willing and you continue to show up, you are doing your part. Okay, so finally, we're at the dose. This week's dose is to think about, if you are starting therapy, what is the loudest fear that is holding you back? And if you're in therapy, what are you avoiding? I think both of these questions can get to answers that unlock mental processes that are going on that we don't even recognize that might be holding us back from our greatest expansion and growth. And my challenge for you is to consider any way in which you can care for your mental health outside of therapy hour. So really understanding that while therapy is a component of the evergreen prescription, it can be such a helpful and important part of that holistic prescription for healing and expansion. It is still just one of the parts. So really considering all the other ways that you can care for your mental health and you can be there and show up for yourself outside of therapy. I don't think you can underestimate the power of a good therapeutic relationship, but to that end, I really don't think you can underestimate the power of the relationship that you have with yourself. So the challenge is to look around at what else you can do, prioritizing your sleep, maybe journaling, doing some meditation or mindfulness practices, reaching out for support, any kind of support from other loved ones in your life, any way that you can extend that hug of care back to yourself and love, and to prioritize you and what you need. So that's it. That's my soapbox. That hopefully wasn't too much of a soapbox, but you guys got to cut me a little bit of slack here. I am a therapist, so this is my wheelhouse. If you give me a mic and you tell me to talk about therapy, sheesh, that's on you. Well, it's on me. I chose it. So, but you clicked it, okay? Well, I hope this was helpful. If you have any more questions, please always feel free. Email me, DM me. I'm here to help and continue. I hope I covered things that you were curious about or gave some good information moving forward, but anything that I missed or that you want to know about, just reach out. This is a community above all else. So as always, I want to keep the discussion going. So until next time, I am wishing you the absolute best. See ya.